I'm sorry, I can't.
3 words. That's all it took for Olivia Hayes to surrender. The medicine her feverish son needed sat on the counter between her empty wallet and the cashier's blank stare, $63 out of reach. She didn't know the man in the gray coat was watching from 2 customers back. She didn't know his grandfather owed her bloodline a life debt from World War II. And she had no idea that accepting his help tonight would someday make strangers question whether she'd stolen everything she'd become. Welcome to Story Theater. Take your seat, silence your phones and get ready to enjoy the story. The sky over the Minneapolis suburbs hung low and gray, pressing down like a lid on a forgotten pot. Late winter had settled into the bones of the city, the kind of cold that did not announce itself with wind or snow, but simply existed, patient and unforgiving. The parking lot of the Clearwater Pharmacy stretched out in uneven patches of asphalt and ice, tire tracks frozen into the ground like scars. Inside, the fluorescent lights hummed their endless mechanical song. The air smelled of disinfectant and something sweet, artificial, like cherry cough syrup mixed with floor cleaner. Rows of shelves stood in perfect formation, offering bandages and vitamins, shampoo bottles and birthday cards. Everything was arranged with a kind of sterile precision, as if order alone could keep the chaos of the world at bay. Olivia Hayes stood at checkout lane number 9, her hands trembling slightly as she placed the small paper bag on the counter. The bag was white, stapled shut at the top, with a prescription label stuck to the front. The letters were small and clinical. Amoxicillin, for Noah Hayes, 1 year old. She was 28 years old, though today she felt much older. Her dark hair was pulled back into a ponytail. That had started to come loose hours ago. A few strands clung to her cheek, damp from the wet snow she had walked through to get here. Her jacket was thin, navy blue with a small tear near the left pocket. She had meant to sew it weeks ago but had never found the time. Beneath it, she wore a gray sweater that had been washed so many times. The fabric had gone soft and shapeless. The cashier, a woman in her 50s with reading glasses hanging from a beaded chain, scanned the bag without looking up. The register beeped once, sharp and final. "That will be $63.42, the woman said. Her voice was flat, rehearsed, the tone of someone who had said the same sentence 1,000 times before. Olivia's breath caught. She had known it would be expensive. She had prepared herself for 50, maybe 55. But $63.42. Her hand moved to her purse, an old canvas bag with fraying straps. She unzipped it slowly, as if moving carefully might change what she already knew. Inside, there was a wallet, a pack of tissues, a pacifier, and a folded grocery receipt. She opened the wallet. 3 $20 bills, a 5, 2 ones, $67 total. Her rent was due in 4 days. She had $38 set aside for that, hidden in an envelope under her mattress. If she used the money in her wallet now, she would have $5 left for food. $5 to last until Friday, when her next paycheck came. $5 for bread, for milk, for diapers. Her fingers hovered over the bills. She could feel the cashier waiting, patient but not kind. Behind her, she sensed the presence of others in line. She did not turn around. She could not bear to see their faces, to see impatience, or pity, or worse, indifference. Noah had been coughing for 3 days. At first, it had been small. The kind of cough that made her pause but not panic. But last night, his fever had spiked. His small body had been hot to the touch. His breaths coming in short, labored gasps. She had held him against her chest, rocking back and forth in the dark, whispering promises she was not sure she could keep. The medicine was not optional. It was survival, but so was the rent. Olivia closed her eyes. She felt the weight of the entire store pressing down on her shoulders. The fluorescent lights seemed too bright, the air too warm. Her throat tightened, a knot forming that made it hard to swallow. She thought of Noah, asleep in his car seat in the back of her friend's car, his cheeks flushed with fever. She thought of the landlord, a man with a thick mustache who did not accept excuses. She thought of the envelope under her mattress, so thin it barely made a sound when she touched it. She could not do both. She could not pay for the medicine and pay the rent. She could not save her son and keep their home. Her hand fell away from the wallet. "I am sorry," she said quietly. Her voice cracked on the last word. "I cannot afford this right now." The cashier looked up for the first time. Her expression shifting from neutral to something softer, though not quite sympathetic. "Do you want to put it back?" Olivia shook her head. She reached out and picked up the paper bag, holding it for a moment as if it were something precious. Then, slowly, she set it down on the counter again, pushing it gently toward the cashier. "I will come back for it," she said. The words felt like a lie even as she spoke them. "Next week. I will come back next week." The cashier nodded. She did not argue. She had seen this before. She picked up the bag and set it aside, beneath the counter, where it would sit until closing time and then be returned to the shelf. Olivia turned away. Her vision blurred, though she did not let herself cry. Not here. Not in front of strangers. She kept her head down as she walked toward the automatic doors, her steps quick and uneven. Behind her, the line shifted forward. An elderly man with a cane. A teenager buying energy drinks. And then, standing quietly near the end, a man in a gray coat. Lucas Hart was 37 years old. He was tall, with broad shoulders, and the kind of posture that came from years of discipline. His hair was dark, cut short, and his face was clean-shaven. He wore a gray wool coat that looked expensive but not flashy. The kind of coat that spoke of quality rather than status. In his arms, he held a small basket with bandages, children's vitamins, and a bottle of juice. Beside him stood his daughter, Ella. She was 5 years old, with light brown hair, pulled into 2 braids and a pink winter coat zipped up to her chin. She held his hand tightly, her small fingers wrapped around 2 of his. Ella had been watching Olivia. Her wide eyes followed the woman as she set the bag down. As she walked away, she tugged on her father's sleeve. "Daddy," she whispered. "That lady. Why is she crying?" Lucas looked down at his daughter, then back toward the doors where Olivia had disappeared. His jaw tightened slightly. He said nothing. The cashier called the next customer forward. The line moved again, steady and indifferent, as if nothing had happened at all. Lucas Hart stood in the pharmacy line with the practiced stillness of a man who had learned to wait. At 37 years old, he carried himself with the kind of precision that never quite left a person, even years after leaving the service. His spine was straight, his shoulders level, his feet planted shoulder-width apart. It was the posture of someone who had stood at attention 1,000 times, who had learned that discipline was not something you wore like a uniform but something that became part of your bones. He had been a captain in the Air Force, flying transport missions across places most people only saw on maps. For 12 years, he had navigated storms and hostile airspace, had brought soldiers home and carried supplies to forward bases where hope arrived in the belly of a cargo plane. He had learned to make decisions quickly, to assess risk in seconds, to trust his instincts when instruments failed and visibility dropped to nothing. Now he ran the Hart Foundation, the organization his grandfather had established 60 years ago with money earned from lumber mills and shipping contracts. The foundation funded scholarships, built community centers, supported medical research. Lucas had taken over operations 3 years ago, after his father passed, and had slowly reshaped it into something more responsive, more connected to the people it served. He preferred quiet work to grand gestures, impact over recognition. But right now, in this brightly lit pharmacy with its mechanical hum and antiseptic smell, he was just a father buying vitamins for his daughter. Ella stood beside him, her small hand wrapped around 2 of his fingers. She was 5 years old, with her mother's light brown hair and his own hazel eyes. She wore a pink winter coat that was slightly too big, the sleeves covering half her hands. She had insisted on wearing it today even though it was meant for next winter, because it had a hood with cat ears sewn onto it. Lucas had learned not to argue about such things. The line moved forward slowly. Lucas shifted the basket to his other arm. He watched the people ahead of him with mild interest, not really thinking about anything in particular. An elderly man counting change. A teenage boy texting while he waited. A woman with tired eyes and a child's prescription. He saw her hesitate at the register. Saw the way her hand froze over her purse. Saw the small, almost invisible shake of her head. Something in her posture reminded him of the families he used to see at base housing, the young spouses left behind during deployments. Trying to hold everything together with too few resources and too little sleep. He recognized the particular kind of exhaustion that came from carrying weight alone. Ella tugged on his sleeve. "Daddy," she whispered, her voice high and uncertain. "That lady, why is she crying?" Lucas looked down at his daughter. Ella's face was tilted up toward him, her eyes wide. With the kind of concern that children feel so intensely, before they learn to look away from other people's pain. She had seen something he had only sensed. The woman was crying, or trying not to, her shoulders curved inward as if to protect herself from view. He opened his mouth to answer, then closed it again. What could he say? That sometimes people did not have enough money? That the world was full of impossible choices? That crying was what happened when you were forced to choose between bad options and worse ones? Ella was 5. She still believed that problems had solutions, that adults could fix things, that fairness was a rule everyone followed. Lucas had stopped believing that a long time ago. But he had not stopped trying to make it true. He watched as the woman set the paper bag down on the counter, pushing it gently toward the cashier. Watched as she turned and walked away, her steps quick and unsteady, her head down. The automatic doors opened and she disappeared into the gray afternoon. The line shuffled forward. The elderly man with the cane paid for his prescription. The teenage boy bought energy drinks and a magazine. Lucas stepped up to the register, Ella still holding his hand. But his eyes kept drifting to the counter, to the space beneath it where the cashier had placed the white paper bag. He could see just the edge of it, the corner of the prescription label. Amoxicillin, a child's medicine, something simple and necessary and completely out of reach. The cashier looked at him expectantly. "Next customer, please." Lucas did not move toward her. Instead, he turned and looked back at Ella. His daughter was still watching the doors where the woman had gone. Her small face was troubled, her eyebrows drawn together in a way that made her look far older than 5. "Is she going to be okay?" Ella asked quietly. Lucas felt something shift in his chest. It was not a dramatic feeling, not a sudden revelation. It was simpler than that. It was the recognition that he had a choice, right now, in this moment, to do something or to do nothing. He could finish his transaction, go home, forget this scene by tomorrow. Or he could act. In the Air Force, they had taught him that leadership was not about grand speeches or heroic moments. It was about the small decisions made when no one was watching. It was about doing what was right even when it was inconvenient, even when no one would know, even when it changed nothing except one small corner of the world. He squeezed Ella's hand gently, then let go. "Wait here for just a moment," he said. He stepped out of line and walked back to the register. The cashier looked up, surprised. Behind him, the teenage boy sighed loudly, impatient. Lucas ignored him. He leaned forward slightly, his voice low and even. "The woman who was just here," he said. "The one who left the prescription. I would like to pay for it." The cashier blinked. "You want to pay for her medicine?" "Yes. Do you know her?" "No." The cashier studied him for a moment, as if trying to determine whether this was some kind of joke or scam. But Lucas's face was calm, serious, completely sincere. She reached beneath the counter and pulled out the white paper bag. "It is $63.42, she said. Lucas pulled his wallet from his coat pocket and handed her his credit card. The transaction took less than a minute. The register beeped. The receipt printed. The cashier placed the medicine in a plastic pharmacy bag and handed it to him. "Do you want me to hold this for her?" she asked. "No," Lucas said. "I will make sure she gets it." He turned and walked back to where Ella stood. His daughter looked up at him with a question in her eyes, but she did not ask it aloud. She simply took his hand again and walked with him toward the exit. They did not go back to the checkout line. Lucas left his basket on a nearby shelf, the bandages and vitamins forgotten. None of it mattered now. He had something more important to deliver. The automatic doors slid open and the cold air hit them like a wall. Lucas pulled Ella's hood up over her head, adjusting the cat ears so they stood straight. She giggled despite the cold. Across the parking lot, past the rows of cars and shopping carts, Lucas saw the woman. She was walking toward the street, toward the bus stop sign visible in the distance. Her thin jacket offered little protection against the wind. She walked quickly, her arms wrapped around herself. Lucas looked down at the white bag in his hand. Then he looked at Ella. "Come on," he said quietly. "We are going for a walk." They stepped out into the cold, following the path the woman had taken, moving steadily toward the bus stop where she waited alone in the falling snow. The snow had begun to fall in earnest now, soft flakes drifting down from a sky that had turned the color of old pewter. The evening was settling in early, the way it did in late winter, when darkness came before people were ready for it. The streetlights along the main road flickered on one by one, casting yellow circles of light onto the sidewalk, where the snow was already beginning to gather in thin, uneven layers. Olivia Hayes stood beneath the bus stop shelter, a small structure made of metal and scratched plexiglass that offered more psychological comfort than actual protection from the weather. The wind came at her sideways, finding every gap in the shelter's design, every space between the panels. She pulled her jacket tighter, though it did almost nothing against the cold. In her arms, wrapped in a blanket that had been washed so many times the fabric had gone threadbare, Noah stirred and coughed. The sound was wet and harsh, coming from deep in his small chest. His face was flushed, his cheeks bright red against the pale blue of the blanket. Even through the layers of fabric, Olivia could feel the heat radiating from his body. She shifted him carefully, supporting his head with one hand while she adjusted the blanket with the other. His eyes were closed but his breathing was rapid and shallow. Each exhale seemed to take effort. She pressed her lips to his forehead, an automatic gesture, something she had done 1,000 times. His skin burned against her mouth. The fever had not broken. If anything, it had gotten worse since this afternoon. Olivia felt panic rising in her throat like bile. She swallowed it down, forced herself to breathe slowly, to think clearly. The bus would come soon. 15 minutes, maybe 20. She would take it home. She would give Noah a lukewarm bath to bring down his temperature. She would hold him and rock him and pray that tomorrow would be better, that his body would fight off whatever infection had taken hold. She did not let herself think about the medicine she had left behind. She did not let herself imagine what it would feel like to mix the antibiotic into a spoonful of applesauce, to watch Noah swallow it, to know that help was already inside him, working to make him well. She could not afford to think about what she did not have. A car passed on the street, its headlights cutting through the falling snow. Then another. The traffic was light but steady, people heading home from work, from errands, from wherever people went when they had somewhere warm to return to. Olivia looked down at Noah again. His small hand had worked its way out of the blanket and lay against her chest, fingers curled into a tiny fist. She covered it with her own hand, trying to warm it. His skin felt hot and cold at the same time, feverish but somehow clammy. "It is okay, baby," she whispered, though she knew he could not hear her, could not understand even if he could. "We will be home soon. We will be okay." The words felt hollow. They were the kind of promises people made when they had no power to keep them. She heard footsteps behind her, the crunch of shoes on the thin layer of snow that had accumulated on the sidewalk. She did not turn around. The bus stop was public. Other people needed to wait for the bus too. But then a voice spoke, low and steady, just a few feet away. "Excuse me." Olivia turned her head slightly, not quite looking, her body angled protectively around Noah. It was a man, tall, wearing a gray coat. A little girl stood beside him, her hand in his. The girl's pink hood was pulled up, cat ears perched on top. Recognition flickered somewhere in the back of Olivia's mind. The pharmacy, the line. She had seen them there, though she had not been paying much attention. She had been too focused on her own private crisis to notice the faces around her. The man took a step closer, then stopped, maintaining a respectful distance. In his hand, he held a white plastic bag. "A pharmacy bag. I think you left this behind," he said. His voice was calm, matter of fact, as if he were simply returning a dropped glove or a forgotten umbrella. But Olivia knew immediately what was in the bag. She could see the white paper package inside, the prescription label visible through the translucent plastic. Her breath caught. For a moment, she could not speak. Her arms tightened around Noah automatically, a defensive reflex. "I did not leave it behind," she said finally, her voice harder than she intended. "I could not afford it." The man nodded, as if she had simply confirmed something he already knew. "I know. I paid for it." The words hung in the cold air between them. Olivia stared at him, trying to understand, trying to process what was happening. He had paid for it. This stranger, this man she did not know, whose name she did not know, who had no reason to care about her or her son. "Why would you do that?" she asked. The question came out sharp, almost accusatory. The man did not flinch. "Because your child needs medicine." Olivia shook her head. "I cannot accept that. I cannot take money from strangers." "It is not money," the man said. "It is medicine. And it is already paid for." He held the bag out toward her, not pushing it into her space but making it available, offering it without demanding that she take it. Olivia looked at the bag. Then at the man. Then at his daughter, who was watching her with wide, serious eyes. The little girl's expression was full of something that looked like hope. As if she desperately wanted Olivia to say yes, to take the medicine, to make everything better. Olivia's hands gripped Noah tighter. Every instinct in her body was screaming at her to refuse, to maintain her dignity, to not be the kind of person who needed charity from strangers. She had worked so hard to stand on her own, to not ask for help, to carry her burdens without complaint. Accepting this felt like admitting defeat, like confirming every fear she had about not being enough. Not having enough, not being able to provide for her child. "I do not need your pity," she said quietly. "Good," the man replied. "Because I am not offering pity." Before Olivia could respond, Noah coughed again. This time it was worse, a series of harsh, rattling sounds that shook his entire body. His eyes opened for a moment, glassy and unfocused, and then closed again. His breathing sounded wet and labored. Olivia felt her resolve crack. This was not about her pride. This was not about what she needed. This was about Noah, about a 1-year-old child who was sick and getting sicker, who needed help that she could not provide alone. She looked at the man again. His face was serious but not pitying. There was no condescension in his expression, no smugness, no self-satisfaction. He looked like someone who had made a decision and was following through on it, nothing more and nothing less. Slowly, Olivia reached out with one hand, keeping Noah secure against her chest with the other. Her fingers touched the plastic bag and the man released it into her grasp. The bag was light but it felt impossibly heavy, weighted with obligation and gratitude and shame and relief all at once. "Thank you," she whispered. The words were inadequate but they were all she had. The man nodded. He crouched down slightly so he was closer to eye level with her, though he still maintained distance, still respected her space. "This is not charity," he said quietly. "This is not me helping you because I think you cannot help yourself. This is a choice from one parent to another. I have a daughter. You have a son. We both know what it is like to watch them suffer and feel powerless. If I can take away even a small part of that powerlessness, then I will. Not because you need saving, but because we all need help sometimes. And because someone helped me once, when I needed it." His words were simple and direct, with no trace of performance or self-righteousness. He spoke as if he were stating obvious facts rather than making a grand gesture. Olivia felt tears burning at the corners of her eyes but she refused to let them fall. She nodded, not trusting her voice. The man stood up. He took his daughter's hand again, and the little girl smiled shyly at Olivia. "Take care of your son," the man said. Then he turned and walked away, his daughter beside him, the two of them disappearing into the falling snow and the gathering darkness. Within moments, they were gone, swallowed by the winter evening. Olivia stood alone beneath the bus stop shelter, Noah in one arm and the white pharmacy bag in her other hand. The snow fell around her, silent and steady. In the distance, she could hear the low rumble of the approaching bus. She looked down at the bag, then at her son's flushed face. For the first time in days, she felt something that was not quite hope but was close to it. The possibility that tomorrow might be different. That sometimes the world offered help instead of obstacles. That kindness existed in places she had not thought to look for it. The bus pulled up to the curb, its brakes hissing, its doors opening with a mechanical sigh. Olivia stepped forward, climbed the stairs, and found a seat near the back. She held Noah close and kept the medicine bag on her lap where she could see it, where she could know it was real. Outside the window, the snow continued to fall, covering everything in white. The Maplewood apartments sat on the edge of the industrial district. A three-story brick building that had been considered modern in 1962 but now looked like something time had forgotten. The exterior walls were stained with decades of city grime, the colors somewhere between rust and mud. Several windows on the upper floors were covered with cardboard or plastic sheeting where the glass had cracked and not been replaced. The fire escape clung to the side of the building like a metal skeleton, its bolts loose, its paint peeling away in long strips. Olivia lived on the second floor, Unit 212. The apartment was small, just a single room that served as bedroom, living room, and nursery all at once. The kitchenette occupied one corner, separated from the rest of the space by a chest-high counter. A narrow bathroom with a shower stall barely big enough to turn around in completed the layout. The rent was $480 a month, more than Olivia could reasonably afford. But cheaper than anything else she had been able to find that would accept a single mother with no references and barely any credit history. She unlocked the door and stepped inside, careful not to let it slam. Noah had finally fallen asleep on the bus ride home, his small body going limp against her chest as the medicine began its work. She had given him the first dose right there at the bus stop, mixing the pink liquid with a little water in the bottle. She always carried, watching as he swallowed it down between coughs. The apartment was cold, the radiator system in the building worked intermittently at best, and tonight it seemed to have given up entirely. Olivia could see her breath forming small clouds in the air. She moved quickly across the worn carpet to the corner where she had set up Noah's sleeping area, a portable crib wedged between her own bed and the wall. She laid him down gently, tucking 3 blankets around him, layering them like armor against the cold. He stirred but did not wake. His breathing was still labored, still too fast, but the edge of panic had left it. The fever remained, but it no longer felt quite so dangerous. She placed her hand on his forehead. Still hot, still worrying, but survivable. Olivia straightened and looked around the apartment. The electric space heater sat unplugged near the foot of her bed. She had been rationing its use, trying to keep the electric bill manageable. But tonight Noah needed warmth more than she needed to save money. She carried the heater closer to the crib, plugged it in, and turned the dial to medium. The coils began to glow orange, pushing heat into the small space. She positioned it carefully, far enough from the crib to be safe, close enough to make a difference. The white pharmacy bag sat on the small kitchen table where she had placed it when she came in. Olivia stared at it for a long moment. The medication inside represented more than just antibiotics. It represented a choice someone else had made. A choice to help her when she had not asked for it. A choice that had saved her from having to make an impossible decision. She walked over and picked up the bag, pulling out the paper prescription container. Noah Hayes, 1 year old. The label was ordinary, clinical, the same as 1,000 other prescriptions filled that day. But this one had been paid for by a stranger. A man whose name she did not know. A man who had followed her to a bus stop in the snow to give her something she desperately needed. Olivia sat down at the table, still holding the medicine. Her hands were shaking, not from cold but from the delayed shock of everything that had happened. She had been so close to breaking today. So close to the edge where one more problem, one more bill, one more crisis would have pushed her over into the kind of despair that was hard to come back from. But someone had caught her. Someone had seen her falling and had reached out a hand. "A stranger changed my day," she whispered to the empty apartment. The words felt inadequate, too simple for what had happened. A stranger had changed more than her day. He had changed her understanding of what was possible. He had shown her that kindness still existed, that people still helped each other, that she was not as alone as she had thought. She did not even know his name. The thought hit her suddenly, accompanied by a strange feeling she could not quite name. Gratitude, yes, but also something like curiosity. Who was he? Why had he helped? What had made him turn around in that pharmacy line and decide that her crisis was worth his time and money? She would probably never know. He had left before she could ask. Had walked away into the snow with his daughter, disappearing like something from a dream. All she had was the medicine and the memory of his voice, calm and certain, telling her this was not charity but a choice he made as a parent. Olivia stood and returned the medicine to the bag, then set it carefully on the counter where she would remember it for the morning dose. She checked on Noah one more time, adjusting his blankets, listening to his breathing. Slower now, steadier. The medicine was working. She allowed herself a small moment of relief. Tomorrow would still be hard. The rent would still be due. Money would still be impossibly tight. But Noah would be getting better. That was enough for tonight. Across the city, in a neighborhood where the houses had driveways and the streets had trees, Lucas Hart walked through his front door and set his keys in the ceramic bowl on the hall table. The house was quiet. Ella had fallen asleep in the car on the way home, exhausted by the cold and the unexpected walk to the bus stop. He had carried her inside and put her to bed without waking her, pulling off her shoes and covering her with the quilt her grandmother had made. Now he stood in his study, a room lined with bookshelves and dominated by a large oak desk that had belonged to his grandfather. The desk was covered with foundation paperwork, grant applications, financial reports. Lucas had been working late every night this week, trying to finalize the budget for next year's programs. But tonight he could not focus on spreadsheets. His mind kept returning to the pharmacy, to the woman at the bus stop, to the look on her face when she had finally accepted the medicine. Pride and shame and desperate relief all mixed together. He had done the right thing. He knew that, but the encounter had unsettled him in a way he had not expected. It had made him think about all the other people in the city, in the country, in the world, who faced similar choices every day. People who had to decide between medicine and rent, between food and electricity, between surviving today and planning for tomorrow. The foundation did good work. He knew that too, but suddenly it felt insufficient. Like standing at the edge of an ocean with a bucket, trying to empty it one scoop at a time. Lucas sat down at his desk and noticed the newspaper folded beside his laptop. He had picked it up this morning but had not had time to read it. He unfolded it now, more out of habit than interest, scanning the headlines without really processing them. Then his eyes stopped. Lower right corner of page 3. A small article, barely 4 paragraphs long. The headline read War Hero Benjamin Hayes Memorial Opens. Lucas felt something shift in his chest. He leaned forward, pulling the paper closer, reading carefully. The memorial had been established by the Hayes family to honor their grandfather, Captain Benjamin Hayes, who had served in World War II. He had died saving 3 men in his unit during the Battle of St. Lo in 1944, throwing himself on a grenade to shield his fellow soldiers. The memorial consisted of a small building in the Veterans Park on the south side of the city, housing photographs, letters, and military records. Lucas read the name again. Benjamin Hayes. Captain Benjamin Hayes. His grandfather's war journals were upstairs in a cedar chest in the attic. Lucas had read them years ago, shortly after his grandfather died. They were not detailed accounts, just brief notes about dates and locations, names of men in his unit. Small observations about weather and food and the grinding boredom punctuated by moments of terror that defined war. But one name appeared again and again in those journals. Ben Hayes. His grandfather's friend. The man who had pulled him from a burning vehicle. The man who had covered their retreat when they were pinned down by machine gun fire. The man who had, according to family stories, saved William Hart's life at least twice. Lucas stood abruptly, leaving the newspaper open on the desk. He walked to the window and looked out at his quiet street, at the houses. With their neat lawns and their 2-car garages, at the life he had built on a foundation of privilege and opportunity. His grandfather had survived the war because of Benjamin Hayes. Had come home, started a business, raised a family, built a fortune. Had created the foundation that Lucas now ran. And tonight, nearly 80 years later, Lucas had helped Benjamin Hayes's granddaughter. He had not known, had not recognized the name on the prescription label. It was pure chance. Or perhaps something else. Something that felt almost like the universe completing a circle, paying forward a debt that had gone unpaid for generations. Lucas looked back at the newspaper article. The memorial opened tomorrow. He would go. He would see the photographs and read the letters and learn more about the man who had made his own existence possible. And maybe, he thought, he would find a way to do more than just hand out medicine at bus stops. Maybe there was a larger gesture waiting to be made. A way to honor both the debt his family owed and the need he had witnessed tonight. The idea began to form slowly, piece by piece, like something assembling itself in the back of his mind. He did not have all the details yet. But he had the beginning of something. Something that felt right. Lucas returned to his desk and pulled out a fresh notebook. He wrote 2 words at the top of the first page. Project Northlight. Then he began to sketch out ideas, working late into the night while the house slept around him. The Veterans History Museum occupied a converted warehouse in the old industrial district downtown. The building was brick, 3 stories tall, with tall windows that had once allowed light into factory floors, where machinery had stamped and pressed and assembled products whose names no one remembered anymore. Now those windows let sunlight fall across display cases, filled with medals and uniforms, across walls covered with photographs of young men who had gone to war and sometimes come home. Lucas arrived just after 10 in the morning. The parking lot was nearly empty, just a few scattered cars belonging to staff and the handful of visitors who came on weekday mornings. He locked his car and walked toward the entrance, his breath forming small clouds in the cold air. The snow from yesterday had stopped, leaving everything covered in a thin white blanket that crunched under his shoes. Inside, the museum was quiet. The lobby had polished concrete floors and exposed wooden beams across the ceiling. A reception desk sat near the entrance, staffed by an elderly man in a cardigan sweater who looked up as Lucas entered. "Good morning," the man said. "Welcome to the Veterans History Museum." "Good morning," Lucas replied. "I am here to see the Benjamin Hayes Memorial exhibit." The man's face brightened. "Ah yes, that just opened last week. Beautiful tribute. Take the stairs to the 2nd floor, turn right, and it is the 3rd room on your left. You cannot miss it." Lucas thanked him and climbed the wide staircase to the 2nd floor. His footsteps echoed in the empty stairwell. At the top, he turned right and walked down a hallway lined with framed photographs. Soldiers in formation, ships at sea, planes on runways. Each image was a frozen moment from conflicts that had shaped the century. The 3rd door on the left stood open. Above it, a placard read, "Benjamin Hayes, A Life of Service." Lucas stepped through. The room was small, intimate. The walls were painted a soft gray. Track lighting illuminated display cases arranged in a rough circle. In the center of the room stood a bronze bust of a young man in military uniform, his face serious and proud. A nameplate at the base read, "Lieutenant Benjamin Hayes, 1920 to 1944. Lucas moved slowly around the room, examining each display. There were personal items in glass cases. Dog tags, a pocket watch, letters written home to family, a Bible with a worn leather cover. Each object told a fragment of a story about a man who had lived 80 years ago. Then he came to the photographs. They were arranged on the wall in chronological order, black and white images that had faded slightly with age but remained clear enough to see details. The first showed a young Benjamin Hayes in his dress uniform, probably taken right after basic training. He looked impossibly young, barely more than a boy, with a serious expression that tried to project confidence and maturity. The next few photographs showed him with his unit. Group shots of men standing in front of barracks or gathered around vehicles. Hayes was always easy to spot, taller than most of the others, with the same serious expression in every image. Lucas moved along the wall, studying each photograph carefully. And then he stopped. The photograph was larger than the others, mounted in a simple black frame. It showed 2 soldiers standing side by side in front of what looked like a command tent. Both wore combat uniforms, their sleeves rolled up, their faces dusty and tired. The landscape behind them was French countryside, rolling hills dotted with trees. Someone had written on the photograph in white ink, the letters small and precise. Lieutenant Benjamin Hayes and Captain William Hart. Normandy, France. June 1944. Lucas felt his breath catch. He stepped closer to the photograph, close enough that his nose was almost touching the glass. Captain William Hart, his grandfather, standing there beside Benjamin Hayes, both of them young and alive, both of them survivors of battles Lucas could only imagine. His grandfather's face was recognizable even across the decades. The same strong jaw, the same direct gaze, the same way of standing with his weight slightly forward as if ready to move at a moment's notice. Lucas had seen photographs of his grandfather before, of course. There were albums at home, formal portraits taken in peacetime. But this was different. This captured something raw and real, a moment of brotherhood forged in circumstances most people would never understand. It is an incredible photograph, is it not? Lucas turned. A woman stood in the doorway, middle-aged, with gray-streaked hair pulled back in a ponytail. She wore a museum staff badge clipped to her sweater. She smiled and walked into the room. "I am sorry, I did not mean to startle you," she said. "I am Sarah Chen, one of the curators here. I helped put this exhibit together." "Lucas Hart," he said, shaking her offered hand. Her eyes widened slightly. "Hart? Are you related to William Hart?" "He was my grandfather." Sarah's smile grew wider. "Then you must see this." She gestured for him to follow her to another display case on the opposite wall. Inside was a leather journal, open to a page covered in neat handwriting. Beside it was a typed transcription of the text, easier to read. "Your grandfather kept a detailed diary during his service," Sarah explained. "This particular entry was written 3 days after that photograph was taken. Here, read this part." She pointed to a section of the transcription. Lucas leaned forward and read. "June 28, 1944. Ambushed today during supply run. Vehicle hit by artillery. Fire everywhere. Could not get the door open. Thought I was finished. Then Hayes appeared, seemed to come out of nowhere. Pulled me through the window seconds before the fuel tank exploded. He saved my life. I owe him everything." Lucas read the passage twice. His grandfather's words, preserved across 80 years, describing the moment when Benjamin Hayes had saved his life. The debt that had never been repaid because Hayes had died 2 months later in another battle, another explosion. Another moment when luck and skill had not been enough. Sarah watched him read. When he looked up, she continued speaking, her voice soft with respect. "Your grandfather survived the war and lived until 1998. I believe. Benjamin Hayes died in August of that same year, during the liberation of Paris. He was posthumously awarded the Silver Star for his actions." She paused, then added, "Because of Mr. Hayes, Lieutenant Hart survived. And because Hart survived, his family continued. Including you." Lucas felt something shift inside his chest. It was not a dramatic feeling, not a revelation that arrived with trumpets and light. It was quieter than that. It was the recognition of connection, of the way lives touched each other across time, creating ripples that spread far beyond the original moment. His grandfather had lived because Benjamin Hayes had acted. And because his grandfather had lived, Lucas existed. And because Lucas existed, he had been in that pharmacy yesterday. He had seen a woman named Hayes struggling to buy medicine for her son. The world had given him a chance to repay a debt he had not known existed. He thought about Olivia at the bus stop. He thought about the medicine in her hands. He thought about the fear in her eyes transforming into reluctant acceptance. He had done so little, really. $63.42. A transaction that had taken less than a minute. But it had meant everything. Lucas turned back to the photograph of the 2 soldiers. His grandfather and Benjamin Hayes, standing together in the French countryside. Both of them alive, both of them unaware of how their actions would echo forward through decades. He felt his mouth curve into a small smile. It was not happiness exactly, but something close to it. A sense of rightness, of circles completing themselves, of debts being honored even when the original parties were long gone. "The world has not finished repaying its debts," he said quietly, more to himself than to Sarah. She looked at him with curiosity but did not ask what he meant. Instead, she said, "Would you like to see the rest of the exhibit? There are letters, commendations, more photographs." "Yes," Lucas said, "I would like that very much." He spent another hour in the room, reading every word, studying every image, learning about the man who had saved his grandfather's life. And as he learned, he began to form an idea. It started small, just a seed of thought, but it grew as he moved through the exhibit. By the time he left the museum, stepping back out into the cold winter air, the idea had taken shape. He would do more than just pay for medicine. He would create something lasting. Something that honored both the past and the future. Something that turned a moment of kindness into a legacy. He pulled out his phone and began making notes as he walked to his car. By the time he reached the parking lot, he had already outlined the basic structure. A program for single mothers, for people who needed not just charity but opportunity, not just help but hope. He would call it Project Northlight. And it would be his way of ensuring that the debt between Hart and Hayes was repaid not just once, but again and again, spreading outward like ripples across still water. Lucas sat in his car and looked back at the museum building. Somewhere inside, in that small room with gray walls and track lighting, two young soldiers stood frozen in a photograph, their arms around each other's shoulders, their futures uncertain but their bond unbreakable. "Thank you, grandfather," Lucas said softly. Then he started the engine and drove toward the foundation offices, ready to begin. The Hart Foundation occupied the fourth floor of a downtown office building overlooking the river. Lucas sat at his desk surrounded by planning documents. A cup of coffee had gone cold at his elbow. He had been working since 7 that morning. It was nearly 3 in the afternoon. Across from him sat Jennifer Park, the program director, sharp with short black hair and reading glasses, and Michael Torres, the financial officer, younger and cautious about budgets. Lucas tapped his pen against his notepad. "I want to call it Project Northlight. Single mothers in Minneapolis who want to start businesses. Seed funding, mentorship, training, and support for 2 years." Jennifer leaned forward. "What kind of businesses?" "Anything viable. Home services, retail, consulting. We give them tools to build something sustainable that can support their families long term." Michael frowned at his laptop. 20 participants would cost roughly $300,000 over 2 years, not counting administrative costs. "The foundation can afford it," Lucas said firmly. Jennifer removed her glasses and looked at him. "Lucas, this is personal for you." What happened? He thought about the pharmacy, the bus stop, the photograph in the museum. "I met someone who needed help. It reminded me the best way to honor the past is to invest in the future." Jennifer nodded slowly. "All right. But we do this right. Application process, selection criteria, accountability. This cannot be charity. It has to be opportunity." "Exactly," Lucas said with conviction. They spent another hour on details. When Jennifer and Michael left, the basic skeleton of Project Northlight had taken shape. Lucas looked out at the river, watching the water flow past. Somewhere in this city, Olivia Hayes would soon see a notice that might change everything. 3 weeks later, Olivia stood in the Maplewood Community Center holding Noah's hand. At 2 years old, he toddled unsteadily beside her. His fever had broken days after the medicine. Within a week, he was back to normal, laughing and getting into everything. The community center was 2 blocks from her apartment. She came twice weekly for a parent support group. Today she came early for a flyer about food assistance. The woman at the desk handed her a stack of papers. Olivia shuffled through them. Utility assistance, health clinic schedules, tax preparation. Then she saw it. Bright blue paper, bold text. Project Northlight, building futures for single mothers. She stopped and read carefully. The Hart Foundation is launching a new entrepreneurship program for single mothers in Minneapolis. We seek motivated individuals who want to start businesses but lack resources. Selected participants receive seed funding, business training, mentorship, and ongoing support for 2 years. This is not charity. This is an investment in your future. Applications due March 15th. Her heart rate increased. She read it again, looking for catches. The criteria seemed straightforward. Single mother, Minneapolis resident, viable business idea, 2-year commitment. She thought about her dreams. She had wanted to be a teacher. She had completed 2 years of college before getting pregnant and dropping out. She had always been good at helping people, explaining things clearly. What if she started a tutoring business? Helping kids who struggled like she had. She could work from home. Set her own hours, build something around Noah's schedule instead of constantly struggling to fit Noah around inflexible work schedules. This is not pity, she whispered. This is opportunity. Noah tugged her pants. Mama, home. She folded the flyer and put it in her purse. Then she picked him up and carried him home. That night after Noah slept, Olivia sat at her small table with her old laptop. The laptop was ancient, bought used from a pawn shop 3 years ago. The battery no longer held a charge, so she kept it plugged in constantly. She found the application online. Basic information first, then an essay explaining her business idea and why she should be selected. She opened a blank document and stared at the blinking cursor. She started typing, deleted it, started again. Slowly, the words began to flow. She wrote about growing up poor, about teachers who saw potential in her. She wrote about dropping out when Noah was born, about choosing to raise him alone. She wrote about minimum wage jobs while watching other children succeed. She wrote about wanting to give children what those teachers gave her. A chance, belief, someone who would not give up. She described her business plan. Start small, tutoring a few students from her apartment. Build a reputation through results. Eventually expand, maybe hire other tutors. Create jobs while helping kids. She wrote until her hands hurt, until her eyes burned. She looked up and realized it was 3 in the morning. She had to work in 5 hours. But she was done. She read through it once more, checking for errors. Then she attached it and hovered her cursor over submit. Fear froze her finger. What if they rejected her? What if her idea was stupid? What if she was not good enough? Then she thought about Noah sleeping in the next room. About the medicine, the stranger at the bus stop, the kindness that changed her day. Someone had believed in her enough to help. Now she had to believe in herself enough to try. She clicked submit. Application received. You will hear from us within 4 weeks. Olivia closed the laptop. She felt exhausted but energized. She checked on Noah before collapsing into bed. 4 weeks felt very long. But 3 weeks and 6 days later, when she came home from her shift at the grocery store and checked her email. While Noah played on the floor, there was a message, Project Northlight congratulations. Her hands shook as she opened it. Dear Olivia Hayes, congratulations. After careful review, we are pleased to inform you that you have been selected to participate in the inaugural cohort of Project Northlight. Your application demonstrated exactly the qualities we are seeking: determination, creativity, and a commitment to building something meaningful. Orientation will be held April 20th at the Hart Foundation offices downtown. Details to follow. Welcome to Project Northlight. We are excited to be part of your journey. She read it 3 times. Then she set her phone down and covered her face with her hands. She was not crying exactly, but her eyes were wet and her breath came in short gasps. Noah, playing with blocks on the floor, looked up with concern. Mama okay? She lowered her hands and smiled through tears. Yes, baby. Mama is okay. Mama is better than okay. She picked him up and spun him around, laughing despite the tears, despite the exhaustion, despite everything. Noah giggled and grabbed at her hair. She held him tight and thought about the future, about possibility, about building something that mattered. She did not know who Lucas Hart was. She did not know the foundation belonged to the man from the pharmacy. She did not know her acceptance was part of a story reaching back 80 years to France. All she knew was that someone had seen her application and decided she was worth investing in. That her dream was worth supporting. That she deserved a chance. And that was enough. 1 year had passed since Olivia received the acceptance email. 1 year of transformation that felt both impossibly long and startlingly brief. She stood now in the grand ballroom of the Nicolette Hotel, wearing a navy blue dress she had bought specifically for this occasion. The first new dress she had purchased in 3 years. The fabric was simple but elegant, falling just below her knees. She had borrowed earrings from her neighbor and spent 20 minutes that morning trying to tame her hair into something presentable. She felt simultaneously proud and terrified, like an imposter who had somehow wandered into a room where she did not belong. The ballroom was magnificent. Crystal chandeliers hung from the high ceiling, casting warm light across round tables draped in white cloth. Each table held a centerpiece of fresh flowers, their perfume mixing with the scent of expensive catering. Around her, the other 19 women who had been selected for Project Northlight sat with their families, all dressed in their best clothes. All wearing expressions that mirrored her own mixture of pride and disbelief. Olivia glanced down at Noah, who sat beside her in a small chair, his legs swinging because his feet did not quite reach the floor. He was 3 years old now, healthy and energetic, wearing a button-down shirt that he had already managed to untuck. He was coloring on a paper placemat with crayons provided by the hotel staff, his tongue poking out slightly in concentration. Looking at him, Olivia felt her chest tighten with emotion. Everything she had done this year had been for him. The past 12 months had been the hardest and most rewarding of her life. She had attended workshops every week, learning about business planning, marketing, financial management, legal requirements. She had met with her assigned mentor, a retired teacher named Patricia who had run her own tutoring center for 20 years. Patricia had been patient and demanding in equal measure, pushing Olivia to think bigger while keeping her grounded in practical realities. Olivia had started small, just as she planned. 3 students at first, meeting twice a week in her apartment. Then 5 students. Then 8. Word spread through the community. Parents began calling, asking if she had openings. By month 6, she had 12 regular students and a waiting list. By month 9, she had moved her operation to a small rented space in a strip mall, just 300 square feet, but it was hers. She had painted the walls herself, a cheerful yellow that made the cramped space feel brighter. She had bought used desks and chairs, hung educational posters, created a small library of books. Last month, she had hired her first employee, another single mother from the program who specialized in math. Next month, she would hire a second. The business was still small, still fragile, but it was growing. More importantly, it was working. Her students' grades were improving. Parents were grateful. She was making enough money to pay her rent without panic, to buy Noah new shoes when he needed them, to put a little aside each month for emergencies. She had done this. With help, yes, but she had done the work. She had shown up every day. She had learned and adapted and pushed through doubt and exhaustion. She had built something real. The lights dimmed slightly, and conversation in the ballroom quieted. A woman in a burgundy suit walked to the podium at the front of the room. She was in her 50s, with gray streaked hair pulled into a professional bun. She tapped the microphone twice, and the sound echoed through the speakers. Good evening, everyone. My name is Margaret Sloan, and I serve on the board of directors for the Heart Foundation. It is my great pleasure to welcome you all to tonight's celebration. Polite applause rippled through the room. Margaret smiled and waited for it to subside before continuing. 1 year ago, 20 extraordinary women began a journey. They came from different backgrounds, different circumstances, but they all shared something crucial. Vision, determination, the courage to believe they could build something better for themselves and their families. Olivia felt her face grow warm. She was not used to being praised, not used to being seen as extraordinary. She was just doing what needed to be done, the same way she had always done. Over the past 12 months, Margaret continued, we have watched these women transform their dreams into reality. They have launched businesses. They have created jobs. They have proven that when we invest in people, not just with money but with education and support and belief, remarkable things happen. Margaret paused, her gaze sweeping across the room. Tonight, we celebrate their achievements. But we also celebrate the vision of the person who made this program possible. The person who designed Project Northlight from the ground up, who fought for its funding. Who believed that this was exactly the kind of work the Heart Foundation should be doing. Olivia's attention sharpened. She had wondered, occasionally, who had created this program. She had assumed it was a committee, a group of foundation executives making decisions in boardrooms. She had never thought about it being one person's vision. Ladies and gentlemen, Margaret said, her voice taking on a note of warmth and respect, please join me in welcoming the founder and director of the Heart Foundation. A former captain in the United States Air Force, and the architect of Project Northlight. Lucas Hart. Applause filled the room, louder this time. Olivia clapped along with everyone else, her eyes turning toward the side of the stage where a figure emerged from the shadows. He was tall, wearing a dark suit that fit him perfectly. His hair was neatly combed, his posture upright and confident. He walked to the podium with steady, measured steps, the kind of walk that came from years of military discipline. The stage lights caught his face as he reached the microphone. Olivia's hands stopped moving. The applause continued around her, but she no longer heard it. She knew that face. The room seemed to tilt slightly. Her breath caught in her throat. She stared at the man on the stage, her mind racing backward through time, through the months that had passed, through the fog of exhaustion and struggle, until she landed on a specific moment. A cold evening, snow falling, a bus stop shelter, a stranger in a gray coat holding out a white plastic bag. "I think you left this behind." It was him, the man from the pharmacy. The man who had paid for No's medicine. The man who had followed her to the bus stop and given her something she could not buy for herself. The man who had said, "This is not charity. This is a choice I made as a parent." Her eyes widened, her heart hammered against her ribs. The recognition hit her like a physical force, making her dizzy. From the stage, Lucas Hart looked out over the audience. His eyes moved across the tables, acknowledging the applause with a small nod. Then his gaze found hers. For a moment, time stopped. The distance between them collapsed. They were no longer in a ballroom filled with hundreds of people. They were back at that bus stop, snow falling between them, a small act of kindness creating a connection neither of them had understood at the time. His expression changed, just slightly. A flicker of recognition crossed his face. His eyes held hers for 2 seconds, maybe 3. Long enough for understanding to pass between them without words. He had known. When he designed this program, when he approved the applications, when he saw her name. He had known. This entire year. This opportunity. This chance to build something better. It was not random. It was not luck. It was deliberate. It was him. Olivia felt tears prick at her eyes. She blinked rapidly, trying to keep them from falling. Beside her, Noah looked up from his coloring. "Mama, why you crying?" She reached down and squeezed his hand gently. "Happy tears, baby. Just happy tears." On the stage, Lucas began to speak. His voice was deep and steady, amplified by the microphone, filling the room with quiet authority. "Thank you, Margaret. And thank you all for being here tonight." He paused, his eyes sweeping across the audience again, lingering for just a fraction of a second longer when they passed over Olivia's table. 1 year ago, this program was just an idea. A belief that we could do more than write checks. That we could invest in people in a way that created real, lasting change. He spoke about the program, about the women's achievements, about the future of Project Northlight. But Olivia barely heard the words. She was still processing the revelation, still trying to understand what it meant. He had helped her twice. Once at the bus stop, when she was a stranger. Once with this program, when she was a name on an application. Both times, he had given her not charity, but opportunity. And now, standing on that stage under the bright lights, he looked like exactly what he was. Not a savior, not a benefactor, just a man who had made choices, who had acted when he saw someone struggling. Who had built something meaningful out of a moment of kindness at a bus stop on a winter evening. Their eyes met again across the crowded room. And in that moment, Olivia understood something important. This story was not about being rescued. It was about being seen. About being given a chance to prove what she had always known she could do. She smiled through her tears, and from the stage, Lucas Hart smiled back. The ceremony had ended an hour ago. Most guests had left, but a smaller group remained in a private conference room on the second floor. The room had wood-paneled walls and a long table surrounded by leather chairs. Large windows overlooked the city street below. Olivia sat at the table, her hands folded in her lap, heart racing. Lucas Hart sat several chairs away, expression calm but watchful. Between them sat other program participants, board members, and staff. The atmosphere had shifted from celebratory to tense. Margaret Sloane stood at the head of the table. She had removed her jacket, revealing a crisp white blouse. Her gray-streaked hair remained perfectly in place. She held a folder, her expression serious. She was the Ethics Oversight Director for the Heart Foundation, a role she took seriously, perhaps too seriously. I apologize for keeping everyone after such a wonderful celebration, Margaret began. But something has come to my attention that requires immediate discussion. The room fell silent. Olivia felt a cold knot form in her stomach. Margaret opened her folder and pulled out documents. During my routine review, I discovered something concerning. One of our program participants had a prior connection to Mr. Hart before being accepted into Project Northlight. Olivia's breath caught. Heads turned toward Lucas, then toward her. Heat rose to her face. According to pharmacy records, Margaret continued, Mr. Hart purchased a prescription on behalf of Olivia Hayes. Approximately 6 weeks before she submitted her application. The words hung like an accusation. Olivia's mind raced. How had Margaret found out? Why did it matter? Furthermore, this transaction occurred under circumstances suggesting Mr. Hart may have known Miss Hayes was facing financial difficulties. Which raises a serious question about the integrity of our selection process. An older board member leaned forward. Margaret, what exactly are you suggesting? I am suggesting that if the founder had a personal relationship with an applicant, it compromises transparency and fairness. It creates the appearance, if not the reality, of favoritism. I did not know her, Lucas said quietly, with an edge to his voice. I met her once, for approximately 5 minutes, in a pharmacy. I paid for medication her son needed. That was the extent of our interaction before she applied. But you remembered her, Margaret pressed. You remembered her name when you reviewed applications. Yes, Lucas admitted. I remembered her. Then you should have recused yourself from her application review. The fact that you did not raises serious ethical concerns. Olivia felt her face burning. All the pride from earlier had evaporated, replaced by shame and anger. She was being discussed as if she were not in the room, as if she were a problem rather than a person who had worked herself to exhaustion. People shifted uncomfortably. Some nodded along with Margaret's points. Others looked uncertain. Miss Hayes's application was reviewed by a committee of 5 people, Lucas said, voice controlled but firmer. I was one of 5 votes. Her application was strong. The committee unanimously selected her. But did the committee know about your prior contact? Margaret asked. Lucas was silent. No, he finally said. They did not. Margaret nodded as if this confirmed her suspicions. Then I motioned that we review Miss Hayes's participation and determine whether her selection was appropriate given these circumstances. The words felt like a slap. As if everything she had accomplished might be invalidated. Olivia's hands clenched into fists. Her fingernails dug into her palms. She felt tears threatening but refused to let them fall. Not here, not now. She had earned her place at this table. The room erupted into discussion. Board members talking over each other. Staff members looking uncomfortable. Through it all, Olivia sat frozen, feeling as if the ground beneath her was crumbling. Then something inside her snapped. Not broke, but hardened. She stood up. The sudden movement drew everyone's attention. Conversations died. All eyes turned toward her. She kept her spine straight and her chin up. She thought about Noah, about her tutoring center with its yellow walls, about the students whose grades had improved, about every early morning and late night, every moment of doubt she had pushed through. May I speak? Her voice was quiet but clear. Margaret looked surprised but nodded. Of course. Olivia took a deep breath. Her hands shook, so she pressed them flat against the table. I did not know who Lucas Hart was when I applied to this program. I did not know the foundation was his. I did not know he was the man from the pharmacy until I saw him on that stage tonight. She looked directly at Margaret with steady determination. What happened at that pharmacy had nothing to do with my application. Nothing to do with my business plan. Nothing to do with my qualifications. He saw someone who needed help, and he helped. That was all. But the appearance of impropriety, Margaret began. His help was not money, Olivia interrupted, voice growing stronger. It was faith. He did not give me my business. He did not write my application. He did not stay up until 3 in the morning creating lesson plans or painting walls or calling parents. He gave me medicine for my son. And then, months later, this program gave me opportunity. But getting here, to this moment, to this room, that was my effort. My work. My determination. She turned to face the others at the table. Every woman in this room earned her place. We worked. We learned. We built businesses from nothing. We did not get here because of favoritism or charity or anything except our own effort and the support of a program that believed in us. Her voice cracked slightly, but she did not stop. If you want to review my participation, fine. Review it. Look at my attendance records. Look at my business growth. Look at my student outcomes. Look at the evidence of what I have accomplished. But do not tell me I did not earn this because someone showed me kindness a year ago. The room was completely silent. Olivia could hear her own breathing, feel her heart pounding. She had never stood up for herself so directly and forcefully. It felt terrifying and liberating. Then, slowly, one of the other program participants began to clap. It was quiet at first, just one person, but then another joined. And another. Within seconds, all 19 of the other women were applauding, their faces showing understanding and solidarity. Margaret's expression softened. She looked down at her documents, then back at Olivia. When she spoke again, her voice was quieter. You are right. I apologize for implying otherwise. Your achievements speak for themselves. She turned to Lucas. However, the Foundation does need to establish clearer policies about disclosure and potential conflicts of interest going forward. Lucas nodded. Agreed. We will draft new guidelines immediately. Margaret closed her folder. Then I withdraw my motion to review Miss Hayes's participation. The matter is closed. The tension in the room began to dissipate. People exhaled, shifted in their seats, began to relax. But Olivia remained standing, her body trembling slightly from adrenaline. Lucas looked at her across the table. Their eyes met, and in his expression she saw respect, admiration, and something else she could not quite name. He gave her a small nod, a gesture of acknowledgement that said more than words could. She had defended herself. She had spoken her truth. And people had listened. Slowly, Olivia sat back down, her legs suddenly weak. Around her, conversation resumed, this time lighter, more positive. People were talking about the new guidelines, about the program's success, about plans for next year. But Olivia barely heard them. She was still processing what had just happened, still feeling the residual fire of standing up for herself burning in her chest. She had spent so much of her life being small, being quiet, being grateful for whatever scraps came her way. Tonight, she had been loud. She had taken up space. She had demanded to be seen not as someone who needed saving, but as someone who had saved herself. And it felt good. The next morning, sunlight poured through the tall windows of the Hart Foundation conference room. The emergency board meeting had been called for 9. All 12 board members sat around the table, coffee cups in front of them. Margaret Sloane sat near the middle, her folder closed, her face composed but watchful. Lucas stood at the head of the table holding a leather-bound book. He had spent the night unable to sleep, thinking about everything. At 3 in the morning, he had retrieved his grandfather's war diary and read through it again, paying attention to every mention of Benjamin Hayes. Margaret cleared her throat. Thank you all for coming on short notice. I believe we still need to have a serious conversation about disclosure policies and ethical oversight. Several heads nodded. Lucas simply stood there, holding the journal, waiting. The Hart Foundation has an excellent reputation, Margaret continued. When circumstances arise that could compromise that reputation, we have a responsibility to address them. She looked at Lucas. I am not questioning your intentions. I am questioning the process. I agree, Lucas said calmly. We do need clearer guidelines. I should have disclosed my prior contact with Miss Hayes. That was an oversight, and I take full responsibility. Margaret looked slightly surprised. Thank you for acknowledging that. However, Lucas continued, I would like to provide some context. He set the leather journal on the table. The cover was worn smooth by decades of handling. A leather cord wrapped around it. This is my grandfather's war diary. Captain William Hart. He served in World War II, primarily in France during 1944. He unwrapped the cord and opened the journal carefully. The handwriting inside was neat, written in fading ink. He turned to a marked page. On June 28, 1944, my grandfather wrote this. Lucas read aloud, his voice steady. Ambushed today during supply run. Vehicle hit by artillery. Fire everywhere. Could not get the door open. Thought I was finished. Then Hayes appeared, seemed to come out of nowhere. Pulled me through the window seconds before the fuel tank exploded. He saved my life. I owe him everything. Lucas looked up. Every person in the room was listening intently. Hayes was Lieutenant Benjamin Hayes. He and my grandfather served together for 8 months. They fought side by side through some of the bloodiest battles of the European campaign. He pulled out a photograph protected in plastic and passed it to Jennifer. It showed 2 young men in combat uniforms, arms around each other's shoulders, wearing tired, genuine smiles. Lieutenant Benjamin Hayes died in August 1944 during the liberation of Paris. He was posthumously awarded the Silver Star. My grandfather survived, came home, started a family, built the business that became this foundation. He paused. My grandfather lived for 54 more years after the war. He had 3 children, 7 grandchildren. All because Benjamin Hayes pulled him from a burning vehicle. The photograph reached Margaret. She studied it for a long moment. 2 weeks ago, I visited the Benjamin Hayes Memorial at the Veterans History Museum. That is when I learned that the woman I had helped at the pharmacy was a descendant of the man who saved my grandfather's life. Her last name is Hayes. Her son is Noah Hayes. He could see understanding dawning on faces around the table. When I designed Project Northlight, I did not know about this connection. When I paid for Miss Hayes's medicine, I did not know who she was or who her ancestor had been. I simply saw a mother who could not afford medication for her sick child. His voice grew firmer. And when I saw her application months later, I remembered her. Yes, I remembered her determination, her resilience. But I also saw a strong application with clear vision and demonstrated potential. The selection committee agreed unanimously. He looked directly at Margaret. You asked if this compromises our integrity. But I would argue this demonstrates exactly what this foundation is meant to do. We are here to see people, to recognize potential, to invest in human beings who deserve a chance. Lucas picked up the journal and held it up. This diary contains dozens of entries about Lieutenant Hayes. After the war, my grandfather tried to find Hayes's family to tell them what their son meant to him. But he never succeeded. The trail went cold. He set the journal down gently. 80 years later, without knowing it, I was given the opportunity to complete what my grandfather could not. Not to repay a debt, because debts like that cannot be repaid. But to continue a connection. To honor the memory of a man who saved a life and changed the course of my entire family. The room was silent. Jennifer wiped at her eyes. Michael stared at the table. Even Margaret looked moved. This is not about repayment, Lucas said quietly. This is about continuation. About recognizing that our actions echo forward through time in ways we cannot predict. My grandfather saved lives during the war because Benjamin Hayes saved him first. I built this foundation because my grandfather built a successful business. And Olivia Hayes built a thriving tutoring business because this program gave her tools. He looked around the table, meeting each person's eyes. We are all connected by chains of cause and effect that stretch back further than we can see. Project Northlight is not just about 20 women starting businesses. It is about 20 families whose lives are changing. It is about the next generation, children like Noah Hayes who will grow up with more opportunities because their mothers had a chance. Lucas closed the journal and wrapped the cord around it. So yes, we need better disclosure policies. But we should not let bureaucratic caution prevent us from seeing the humanity in the people we serve. And we should not forget that sometimes the most meaningful work we do is the work that connects past and present. That honors those who came before us by lifting up those who come after. He sat down, setting the journal on the table. Sunlight from the window fell across it, illuminating the worn leather cover. Margaret spoke first, her voice softer than before. That is a remarkable story, Lucas. And you are right. We should not lose sight of why we do this work. She looked around the table. I move that we adopt Project Northlight as a permanent program of the Heart Foundation. With dedicated annual funding and a commitment to expanding it to serve more families each year. I second, Jennifer said immediately. All in favor? Margaret asked. Every hand went up. Unanimously. Motion carries, Margaret said. She looked at Lucas and gave him a small nod of respect. And I recommend we name the program Scholarship Fund after Lieutenant Benjamin Hayes and Captain William Hart. In honor of the connection that made all of this possible. Lucas felt his throat tighten. He nodded, not trusting himself to speak. Around the table, board members began to stand, gathering their materials, talking in low voices about next steps. But Lucas remained seated, his hand resting on his grandfather's journal, thinking about connections that spanned generations, about kindness that echoed forward through time. About two soldiers who had saved each other's lives. Outside the window, the river flowed past, constant and patient. And in that moment, Lucas understood that all rivers were connected, that all stories flowed together, that every act of courage or kindness created ripples that touched shores far beyond sight. His grandfather had been saved. And now, in his own small way, Lucas had continued that salvation forward. It was not the end of the story. It was just another link in a chain that would extend long after he was gone. 18 months had passed since the ceremony. Spring had arrived in Minneapolis with the kind of enthusiasm it always brought after a long winter. The trees along the riverbank wore new leaves in shades of green so bright they almost hurt to look at. The air smelled fresh and alive, carrying the scent of grass and water and possibility. Riverbend Park stretched along the Mississippi River on the city's west side. On this particular Saturday afternoon in late April, the park was crowded with people enjoying the first truly warm day of the year. Children ran and shouted. Dogs chased tennis balls. Couples walked hand in hand along the paths. Near the center of the park, in a wide open meadow, two children stood side by side, their faces turned upward toward the sky. They each held a string that stretched up and up, connecting them to colorful kites that danced on the wind high above. Noah Hayes was 3 years old now, no longer the feverish infant from that cold pharmacy. He had grown tall for his age, with his mother's dark hair and a face full of concentration as he gripped the string of his kite. The kite was red with a yellow tail. It pulled against his hands with a force that made him laugh with delight and nervousness. "Mama, look," he called out, not taking his eyes from the sky. "It is so high." Beside him stood Ella Hart, now 7 years old, wearing jeans and a purple jacket. Her kite was blue with a long silver tail that sparkled in the sunlight. She held her string with the confidence of someone who had flown kites many times before. "You are doing great, Noah," Ella said, her voice carrying the patient tone of an older child teaching a younger one. "Just hold it steady. Do not let go." "I will not let go," Noah promised. 20 feet away, sitting on a picnic blanket spread across the grass, Olivia Hayes watched the children with a smile. She wore a light sweater and jeans, her hair loose around her shoulders. Beside her sat a basket with sandwiches and juice boxes. The past 18 months had transformed her life. Her tutoring business had continued to grow steadily. She now had 5 employees. They operated out of a small office space with 3 rooms for one-on-one tutoring and a larger common area for group sessions. Last month, she had served 48 students. But more significantly, 6 months ago Lucas had approached her with an offer. The Hart Foundation wanted to expand Project Northlight to 3 more cities. They needed someone to coordinate the programs, to share what had worked, to mentor the new cohorts. Someone who had lived it. She had said yes. Now she spent half her time running her tutoring center and half her time working for the foundation. Traveling to meet with applicants and participants, speaking at events, helping to shape the program's future. She had an office at the foundation headquarters. She had business cards with her name printed in elegant script. She had become a leader. Lucas Hart sat on his own blanket a few feet away, his legs stretched out in front of him. He wore a casual shirt and khakis. He was watching the children too, his expression soft with contentment. They had developed an easy friendship over the past year and a half, built on mutual respect and shared purpose. They met weekly to discuss program logistics. They had coffee together sometimes, talking about their children, about the challenges of balancing work and parenthood. There was no romance between them, just a deep understanding that they were both trying to do the same thing. Build something better than what they had been given. Olivia stood up and walked toward the children. She stopped a few feet behind Noah and watched as his kite dipped suddenly to the left. He gasped and pulled on the string, overcorrecting. Easy, Olivia said gently. Small movements. Let the wind do the work. Noah adjusted his grip and the kite steadied. He looked back at her with a huge smile. I did it. You did, she agreed, reaching out to ruffle his hair. Lucas stood from his blanket and walked over to join them. He came to stand beside Olivia, close enough that their shoulders almost touched. Together they watched the two kites dance against the blue sky, red and blue, weaving patterns in the air. They are good together, Lucas said quietly, nodding toward the children. They are, Olivia agreed. They saw each other perhaps once a month, at foundation events or weekend gatherings like this one. But each time they picked up exactly where they had left off. Lucas was quiet for a moment, watching the kites. Then he said, his voice thoughtful, you know, this program is not mine anymore. It stopped being mine the moment it launched. This is your project now. I just provided the spark. Olivia turned to look at him, surprised. That is not true, she said. You built this. You designed it. You fought for it. I built the framework, Lucas said. But you gave it life. You showed other women what was possible. You became the proof that it works. Every person we help now, they are helped because you succeeded first and showed them the way. Olivia felt her throat tighten with emotion. She had been so focused on her own journey, on surviving and building. And proving herself, that she had not stopped to consider what her success might mean to others. She looked back at the children. At Noah, holding tight to his kite string with determined concentration. At Ella, patient and encouraging beside him. At the two kites flying together against the endless blue sky. Legacy is not money, Olivia said quietly, the words coming from somewhere deep inside her. It is not buildings or foundations or programs with names on them. She paused. Legacy is the opportunities we leave behind. The doors we open for others. The belief we give people that they can do hard things and succeed. Lucas nodded slowly. Yes, he said. Exactly that. They stood together in comfortable silence, watching the children play. A breeze moved across the meadow, carrying the scent of new grass and spring flowers. The kites dipped and soared, responding to forces invisible but undeniably real. Noah laughed, a sound of pure joy that carried across the park. His kite had caught a strong current and was climbing higher, pulling at his hands with renewed force. He leaned back, his whole small body fighting the pull, refusing to let go. Higher, he shouted. Look, it is going higher. Ella's kite followed, the two of them rising together, red and blue against the white clouds. The tails streamed behind them, ribbons of color trailing through the air. Olivia felt tears prick at her eyes. Not sad tears, something more complex than that. Gratitude and pride and hope and the bittersweet recognition that moments like this were fleeting. She thought about the pharmacy, about standing at that counter unable to pay for medicine. She thought about the bus stop in the snow, about a stranger's kindness. She thought about filling out an application at 3 in the morning, terrified and hopeful. She thought about every workshop and mentor meeting and late nights spent planning lessons. She thought about all the women in Project Northlight, 20 in the first cohort, 30 in the second, plans for 50 in the third. Each one with her own story. Each one building something from nothing. And she thought about Benjamin Hayes, a soldier she had never met who died 80 years ago. Whose blood she carried in her veins, whose courage had saved a stranger and in doing so had created a chain of events that led directly to this moment. The world was more connected than it appeared. Small actions had large consequences. Kindness echoed forward through generations. Nothing was ever truly finished. Every ending was also a beginning. Lucas glanced at her and must have seen something in her expression, because he asked, Are you all right? Yes, Olivia said, and she meant it. I am more than all right. Noah's kite climbed higher still, a red diamond against infinite blue. The string in his hands was taut, vibrating with tension and possibility. He held on with everything he had, his face turned skyward, following something he had helped create as it rose toward heights he could not yet imagine but somehow knew were possible. And beside him, Ella's blue kite followed, the two of them together, climbing toward the sun. The wind lifted them higher. The children laughed. The river flowed past, patient and constant. And somewhere above it all, invisible but real, the threads that connected people across time and distance held strong. Carrying forward the legacy not of money or power or fame, but of opportunity given and received, of kindness offered and accepted, of belief that said you are worth investing in, your dreams are worth supporting, your life matters. The kites rose. The children held on. The wind carried them forward. And the story continued. Sometimes one act of kindness can change everything, not just someone else's life, but your own. What did this story make you feel? Tell us in the comments. And don't forget to like, share, and subscribe for more stories that stay with you. Thanks for watching. This has been Story Theater.